Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, and it is now a course at NYU and an elective towards the journalism certificate. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. And I am so happy to have Rita Rosenkranz, who is actually my nonfiction agent and the agent for my book, Writing That Gets Noticed. And she founded Rita Rosenkranz Literary Agency after working as an editor at major publishers. She represents almost exclusively adult nonfiction titles in all major categories. She looks for familiar topics presented freshly and lesser-known topics presented commercially. She works with mainstream houses as well as regional publishers for niche projects. Rita, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be with you this morning, Estelle. Thank you.
So can you tell us what you do, not only as an agent, but as somebody who has your own agency? Because that's many more hats, I believe.
Yes. Well, it's defined by abundance, in a word, and curiosity. The great thing about being an agent, which has sustained me over all these years, is the power of the web and what it brings to me in a daily way. The power of discovery, authors who are passionate about a topic and they decide that it's worth sharing with me. The possibility of working with them and being part of their creative team and bringing their passion to fruition. That really offers a deeply satisfying experience. I am a former editor, as you mentioned, so I have experienced it at a different end. Most of those projects were agented, so I was at a later stage, but now I'm at an earlier stage where I get to help shape and craft, especially in this very competitive industry, more than ever, where it helps to have a project that is ready to go before it gets submitted. That's not an absolute, but I know that at my end, I try to make sure that whatever goes out is pristine. So I still get to employ my editorial skills, but of course my main hat is as an agent placing the work with a publisher, let's hope the right publisher, where the author is well paired and can depend on having a good amount of success. And sometimes it's a first-time author, sometimes it's an experienced one who has the next book in them and then others to follow. But again, very rewarding experience for me.
What I want to share about you, Rita, is I did a deep dive before I started looking into agents. And I recommend that to all my writing and coaching students. If you're looking for an agent, you have to research the agent as well to make sure that they're a fit for you. So what I did was I got a subscription to Publishers Marketplace, which you can get for a month, for 2 months, for 6 months, for a year. And I looked to see what books you had published, and I found that you had published some writing books. And in fact, when we spoke, you had said, "Oh, I love writing books." And so that really made me feel that you were aligned with what I wanted to do. And in addition, you're a prolific agent. I mean, you own your own company, but if you look, I just now did a little search for the purposes of this podcast,
And in terms of you pretty much do a book deal a month. And I think your most recent one, January 29th, 2024, The Pause Principle by CEO and founder of the Kane International Communication Institute, Cynthia Keynes. The Pause Principle, navigating the space between stimulus and response, providing 6 strategies based in mindfulness practices, giving individuals the tools necessary to be able to pause in difficult, awkward, and heated conversations. And that was for Wiley. And before that, New Thinking Aloud Dialogues by the YouTube channel expert Jeffrey Mishloves. And his book is New Thinking Aloud Dialogues and 90 Years of Remote Viewing, ESP, and Timeless Awareness, the third thinking in the New Thinking Aloud series, and that's to White Crow. And then you had a pop culture one in October, the author of Raising Critical Thinkers, Julie Bogart's Becoming a Critical Thinker, a workbook. So you are very prolific in the nonfiction, giving real education and information category. But I did notice that some of these social media stars have come onto your radar. Do you think this is a great place now to find authors from TikTok or somewhere who's built a YouTube channel?
In a word, yes, because platform is so key to launching an author. The law of physics, easier to ride a wave that's in motion than to create a wave from the ground up. So the presumption is if an author is viral for good reasons, one hopes, that the author as well as the eventual publisher can capitalize on that pretty easily, and that there's a readied audience for the book. So authors who don't have a platform, who are waiting to be discovered in a very low level way, they're much harder to publish today because of the crowded and very competitive landscape. I wish it weren't so, because I really do, because again, as a former editor, I see content first and the quality of content, and how disappointing to me when great content, wrong author is not ready, will have to wait, hoping that that author doesn't get upstaged by another author who's got more going for him or her at that moment. So timing, of course, is a key, but much easier, generally speaking, when the author has a presence in a marketplace already established, a credible presence, one that suggests the market is ready for that book and that the potential readers are clamoring for it.
So talk to me about credible. What makes somebody who is positioning themselves to write a book, and maybe their first book, credible in your eyes, in the eyes of the market?
There are so many things that could play a part, individually and collectively. Have written on the subject, have unearthed new research that only they can claim a right to, have done many talks on the topic, are a PhD on the topic, although I'm not looking for theses per se to place. That's a whole different agenda and obligation in a way. It's much harder to do. But that they are publicly aligned with the topic. So it is easy and clear for a prospective editor to understand, why am I trying to sell this work with this topic with this particular author? The pair, the match, topic and author are clearly aligned, ideally publicly, so that it's not been so well kept a secret that nobody knows about it.
Yeah, because the idea is, if you're selling a book on a topic that someone is positioning themselves as the expert, they need to already have been the expert in the eyes of some people and a big group of people, whether they're teaching about it or speaking widely about it. And I guess that's something that you assess. Like when you and I spoke, we had met socially prior to the AHA conference, and we've both spoken at Writers Digest conferences. So we knew of each other, but I didn't know that writing books was a niche that you were interested in and had experience in. So that was really, and also I think your way, like you weren't, and you've always said this to me, you're not going to be the person with your heart on your sleeve, like, oh, you're so fantastic, blowing smoke. And I think my husband is like that. He's very kind of stoic and grounded and practical and like just telling it like it is. And I deeply appreciate that in a person.
And Estelle, I appreciate your saying that, because my signature in my own head, at least, is that I want to be able to manage expectations, number one. I think that's my obligation as an agent, not to create any false scenarios that are not likely to play out, because then it's on me. And I do feel that essential responsibility to be truthful and to pave the way for an honest journey. And it's not to say that it's unenthusiastic by any means, or without optimism, or without exclamation points. It's got all of that, but it's got to be grounded, and you use that word. I do feel that I want to be trusted, and I can only be trusted if my comments are reliable. Always been that way, and I can't imagine changing. It's worked for me, but it's who I am. So.
And that resonates for me. And I think that some people look at an agent as that person they're calling at midnight, crying. I can't do this. I'm dealing with this. I'm stressful. And my feeling for you, and I've never been that with you, right? That's not how we interact. I don't feel that is something that you're too keen on anyway. And maybe you are so well respected in the
Oh,
industry, Rita. Anytime I talk to any other agent where I'm speaking and I say that you're my agent for writing that gets noticed, there is a lot of respect and admiration for what you have carved out for yourself and for your authors in the industry. But there are agents who are like, I will be your best friend. I will hold your hand. And yes, you're supportive, but I don't think you want calls from crying
well,
authors at 3 a.m.
thank you for painting that picture, because, I've said repeatedly, agents, there's such a variety. We come in all shape and sizes. I've likened it to a locker room. Isn't that a beautiful thing, that there's a choice for everyone? And we are chemically different, and we do want to match where we resonate. But I do see it, it's a creative relationship, but it's a professional relationship. And I'd like to maintain those standards. I think everyone benefits. Why? Because the author, while I'm the bad cop, if something happens, I am there to intervene. I don't stand back. That is what part of the hyphenate responsibilities of an agent, not to disappear when most needed. But my day is really full managing all the aspects of agenting at every stage. Some of it trying to anticipate for a first-time author who's got no clue what's coming next, for checking in with the experienced authors who still need that call, that email, in part so they know that I'm awake to what's going on. I haven't disappeared. And that is all very time consuming. So the resource of time is so precious. We know that generally in our lives, no matter how old we are, that we can't get that back. And I do respect those authors who value my time, who use my time well, who let me do my best work for them. That's the best kind of relationship. And frankly, I'm mindful of their time. When I'm working on a manuscript, I try to be efficient. I try to walk them through disappointments. If I'm more sort of scripted in a way and less emotive or whatever, it's not to say that it's uncaring. Very much want to get things done right and make sure that their work is supported, and they are supported.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you're saying that. And one of the things that I noticed with you is you are very responsive. Like you are not going to let an email go unanswered. And I never felt that you're, hidden away or focused on somebody else. And so I think that's very important. People have this way of looking at agents, and I see it all the time with my students and with Facebook groups. Oh, an agent spoke to me, an agent retweeted me, an agent said that. And again, it's a match. It needs to be a match. You're not like this supplicant on the bottom of the mountain looking up at Zeus as the agent. Yes, an agent is a gatekeeper, certainly, but it needs to be, I feel, more of an equal situation, like you're helping each other. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, it is so obvious to me. Others have said we're codependent. I have no career without authors. So authors aren't lesser. They are my community that helps me have income, do good work, I'd like to think, manage my curiosity, as I explained early on, that gets fed regularly through my interaction with authors. And over the years, alas, some authors have come to me with such sad stories about how they've been burned or turned or rearranged, their relationship. And it is heart-sinking. That match wasn't good. There are many reasons for that. But yes, we are looking for a comfortable match. Not always clear if it's the perfect match, but a comfortable match. And one would certainly hope an open dialogue. If you have to self-censor in your work with an agent, probably something is missing there. And if you feel you're getting shortchanged in the lower part of the quadrant of that author's list and are having to fend for yourself at the end of the day, probably something is wrong with that picture. And I do believe it is okay to not just sort of sit in your unhappiness, but rather to address it and to address it professionally. That will be the key word I use continuously, not acting out, but asking, will I hear back? And some authors never hear back, and they're forced to make desperate changes in a vacuum.
In the way that we've spoken about the publisher-writer relationship, what to you makes a good situation?
It's obvious to me, I hope obvious to others, and it's obvious in life what works: to be reliable, to be productive, to meet deadlines, to not overextend the time, the appropriate amount of time the editor is supposed to give to you. You'd have to use a gut sense for that. But if you're calling repeatedly about the same thing where you've already gotten an answer, well, that's not a good use of the editor's time. To be clear in your thinking, cover design is often an issue. What works for you, what doesn't? Try to be kind. I think that goes a long way. These are not subordinate characteristics. They get us, they can get us far in life. They can get us far in our publishing lives, because believe it or not, they're sort of rare in publishing too now, as people are so distracted and burdened and worried, with market pressures and so on. So, a good author is a responsible author, and who really looks to, and beyond that point of delivery. You're in the stage of promotion, how aggressive one can be, should be, to enlarge your readership. It doesn't automatically happen. It takes a conscious, deliberate outreach. And you are lucky enough to have a built-in audience that you have built over time. It's very sturdy. It's a reliable, here's that word again, reliable one. It's not going to disappear. You have easy access to it because you've built it authentically. So authors who can do that are a premium, because every category, there are some that are hungrier than others, and I know that, a wide-ranging nonfiction list, but even the hungry categories need authors who are dynamic, personable, reliable, and it helps kind.
Kind is definitely important on both sides. Talk to me about cover, because it sounds like that's an area of consternation for authors, right? Maybe after the contract, and I do want to talk about the contract a little, but that is maybe the first kind of butting of heads that could potentially happen. Talk to me about that and your best advice on how an author should navigate it.
Well, what they say about imitation and how flattering it could be. The truth is, thrillers have a look. I don't do fiction, but I pay attention to that as well. Self-help books have a look. There is a kind of familiarity that I think readers respond to. Sometimes you can think out of the box and make it work, but that's more of a crapshoot. So I, possibly being a minority in this, like for the print to be readable, even when scaled down. Otherwise, it's just a kind of buzz of color and shape. And I think you've missed an opportunity to, in a thumbnail way online, make sure that that cover sings, that it communicates. So for me, some designers, however mature they are in their field, get a little designy, and I can't even read it. And I object to it. It's not my book, it's the author's book. If they like it, then I'll stand back. But if I were to be asked to weigh in, I'm sure I would pick that up. I want it to be able to scale down and readable in that smaller format. And also, for those books that are lucky enough to be face out in a bookstore, that it could present well that way in its total large format. It would be pleasing, that it wouldn't be off-putting. And that is obviously a very subjective aesthetic. So I'm willing to confess that perhaps the palette I'm attracted to is different from what the author would be attracted to, and so on. I won't get in the way on that level, but readability is key.
How about if the author is just not happy with it? How do you recommend that the author address that?
Well, that's where I troubleshoot. I'd hope I'd be invited in at that point. Actually, I would hope, and it doesn't happen in all cases. I like to be CC'd. I'm not going to weigh in on everything, but that means I can troubleshoot in real time. If the book has gone to press, I can't help it that the author doesn't like the cover. It is way too late, and I'll throw up my hands. And I would have hoped they'd know better, given all the preliminary conversations about being looped in. There's just so much I can do. I honestly hope, as do most publishers, that the author is happy with the cover. That will be the incentive to promote their book in the marketplace, one of many incentives, of course. So if you have the choice to satisfy the author without going too crazy in iterations, then that's really a publisher's obligation. But sometimes the publisher will come up with an image that's old-fashioned, let's say, and really doesn't feel current enough to my taste. And I'll ponder it until I could figure out what is wrong with it, so I can express it in a clear way. So a new iteration is in response to clear-cut feedback. But want to troubleshoot in real time, I will advocate for the author, especially if I understand the problems they have. Still, I should say that I don't always agree with the author. You know, it's an important point. They won't necessarily have a bird's eye view about the process and what works. And so I will do my best to explain my point of view and what I think is working about something they don't like, hoping that maybe my experience and the way I'm decoding it for them makes a difference. But, you know, I do want them to be happy. I've worked so hard to get to that stage, sometimes working doggedly just to get the proposal in shape, to get a publisher. That's not always instant, believe me. I could be living with this project a very long time. By the time I see a cover, whether we like it or not, it's a kind of hallelujah moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important for people to realize that their agent should be their advocate, as long as they clearly explain their reasoning for a decision or a feeling. It's not just, I have a feeling. It's like, you know, maybe you say something like, studies show that red does not appeal to blah, blah, blah. I'm just making that up. but have some kind of basis, or the last 5 covers that sold, included this color or something like that. For me, it's always important when somebody sees you. For example, the design team at New World Library said, we see that you wear a lot of pink in your social media. Maybe we should include that in the book. And I was like, yes, I love that idea. And so the word noticed is in pink. And it's not, the whole thing isn't in pink because that would strike as too feminine, but it's part of it. And so I've kind of run with that and even more in terms of my branding. And so it's really trusting the professionals, but also advocating for yourself. You have to advocate for yourself because at the end of the day, your name is on the book. And so you just have to be grounded. I think grounded is a good word. So let's talk contract a little bit because an agent can be so helpful with the contract. And I know that you started your agency. I've been in publishing for 3 decades. You've probably been in publishing for 3 decades. And when you started, probably, I'm not going to, say I know for sure, but advances were very big for authors because there was, I believe, at the time, a smaller pool from which to draw from. Is that what I'm saying correct? And how has that changed over time in your estimation?
Right. Well, I would agree that on average, advances were higher. They have shrunk, so has the pool of readers. In fact, what I've learned about the bestseller list is that often you can be selling a conspicuously low number of copies per week and still get on the list in those drier months, whatever those happen to be. And COVID, alas, was really good to publishing. Royalties were up because book sales were up, people were at home reading. That's changed again, where book sales are now down. And the mainstream book that is going to have a conservative first printing and a conservative projected sell-through for the first year, it is typically not going to get a super stellar advance. Now, my position has always been that good books have a long tail, especially if the author continues to promote them. And so if you have staying power in your own head, it is quite possible to see it as an annuity over time. You've done the work way back, or at least I have. I'm still paying attention, of course. Ideally, the author is still promoting it, maybe promoting a new book that helps rise attention to the older list. And how nice to see that the royalties are steady. I have a number of books that qualify, and it's just, in fact, internationally active. And it's such a blessing, really. It's hard work that has rewards long after the fact.
And you say where you feel you add the most value when it comes to negotiating an author's contract.
Well, I will say that the details count. You can trip over the details. It's not the obvious, not only the obvious, like the advance and the royalties, the sort of bold type offer, but it's everything else. What those subordinate royalties are, who retains the audio rights and the foreign rights, the non-compete clause for certain kinds of authors. It's really everything. I mean, there are some that, in some cases, who owns the copyright? Some university presses will start with the boilerplate that puts it in their name. You have to know to ask for the copyright. Otherwise, it'll be in the publisher's name. And that could be complicated down the line if you want the book reverted, etc. So I think agents who are negotiating with a fine-tooth comb have to use their best sense to project what the world will be beyond the publication of the book. Just to reminisce a bit, or to look back, the ebook publications became so controversial because some of those older contracts didn't provide a clear-cut provision for ebook publication. And so much debate ensued about who owned those rights, and we know how valuable ebooks are. So what can we anticipate today? We can anticipate AI maybe put some restrictions on AI and how it's used, both in terms of incorporated by an author when producing the book and the author's book in being used for others. So you can see this kind of swirl of stuff. It
Yeah.
is absolutely not straightforward. It is all not straightforward.
And that's why an agent is such a helpful resource as you navigate that publishing journey, whether you publish books 20 years ago. I mean, there are people say, I published 75 books. Yes, but publishing then is very different than publishing now.
No question.
It's a whole different ball game. So that doesn't quite compute when you're working with the new contracts and the new restrictions and regulations and all the stuff that's now coming down the pike. I just want to be very clear that you deal specifically with nonfiction.
You'll see some fiction and children's books on my list, but in my day-to-day life, I court nonfiction, and it is a wide-ranging list of categories. I'm really open to a whole lot. Again, it excites me to come upon something that hasn't been done before. The truth is, if it has no easy comp title in the marketplace, I have to work doubly hard very often to convince a publisher that it has a reason for being, because they do want to see that other books in its category that are similar have done well. They have sort of a comfort zone for that.
Yeah.
But I'm less afraid of that. And I'm grateful when I've been able to place books that have no absolute comp in the market. And those that have done well are especially gratifying. But yes, entirely adult nonfiction. That's what I think.
That includes memoir as well. And do you look for authors that are going to be not just one-offs?
Well, it starts with the work, Estelle. It's a relevant question, but I don't depend on authors having more than one book. It starts with a book. In fact, if that first book doesn't do well, I'm not sure what value there is in having other books. That becomes a different kind of conversation. But my focus is, it starts being with a sort of narrow lens. What is it that they're asking me to represent? And can I do that productively? Does it have enough going for it? The nice thing, though, is that sometimes an author will come to me with an idea and we can together re-angle it to make it more commercial. So if an author is up for that, I'll sometimes, if I'm interested enough, and sometimes even if I'm not interested, I'll offer some feedback. But it starts with that one book, and how fabulous when I can go on to build that author's career, or sometimes I've stepped in midstream and continue to build that career, sometimes just doing one based on the author's productivity. The nice thing about working with an author on multiple books is that you've got a shorthand in place. I no longer have to explain the basics. We trust our rhythms. We can really have a mature conversation that goes well past that preliminary talk. And that's nice. I mean, you feel like you've earned your stripes together.
So would you say that authors need to be extroverts?
Well, generally speaking, it helps to connect, to feel passionate enough about your work that whatever inhibitions you might have get overcome by that absolute passion for being on the rooftops and blowing your horn. And that is not shameless. It is a result of the inner workings of your passion, talking about manifesting, going outward and connecting. It is about true love for what you're doing, I think.
I
There
love
are
that.
introverts, people who are less good at it, but can still manage the system. I think if you are a classic introvert, you'll have to find ways and maybe proxies in a kind of way, people who will speak on your behalf. But that's a generation away, right? That's removed, it's third party. And what we are trying to do, generally speaking, is to identify the topic with the author and have that as close an identity as possible. So the third party advocates or proxies who, and it might be a book club person, what have you, who's lifting it. It's so much better when you are identified with the topic, people have a sense of you, they relate, they're interested, and the thread is really close and clean. So you can be an introvert, but you'd have to work it differently.
So Rita, how can a potential author get your attention? What do they need to submit to you? How will they get noticed by you?
Well, thank you. And I'm glad we're getting back to your book because it deserves to be highlighted in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I answer all my mail. As I said, I respond, I look at my email with a curiosity and a hope for connecting with an author whose work is astonishing, who reveals to me something I didn't know before, and I wonder why. How did I miss that over time? My submission guidelines are on my website. If I might say, www.Rita Rosenkranz, that's ROSENKRANZ, no T.com. And it should be clear about the best way. You could start with a query letter or a query in the proposal as an attachment. And at first glance, I like it. I'm going to ask, where are you with other agents and have any publishers seen this work? It's my classic response. I want to get oriented. And I'm quick, generally speaking. If I'm at my desk, I'm going to be looking regularly. I know it's a very competitive arena. And I joke that because my last name starts with R, if authors are looking in the directories and starting at the beginning, I'll have gotten my query a little late in the game. And so there's no reason to pause, but rather to jump right in and figure out if it's a match.
So you're not somebody who's going to say, oh, can I have an exclusive on this for 2 weeks?
I don't think it's fair. Others might, but it is a competitive universe at every end. I think those agents perhaps who handle fiction, if they're going to read a whole work, it makes sense that they want to know that they're not going to be usurped when they're on page 300, So, but I'm usually reviewing a proposal or a manuscript if I need to see that in order to make a final judgment. And at this point, I can it's not to shortchange an author, but I can sort of take the pulse of a work and figure out whether or not I'm a match based on who the author is, what the topic is, how crowded the category is, and so on.
Final question. Is there a topic or a subject or something that you just really want? And if somebody had it, you'd be like, ooh, I'm very interested in this.
I wish I could be that definitive, but I'll be more generic. It's those sort of mind tickle projects that explore an area that we thought we knew, but we didn't. And it is adding real value to the category. That interests me. I think a contribution to a category that's clear cut. That's why we do this, not more of the same, but to further our understanding of a topic we thought we knew. So that could be, history, how to, self-help. It could be a biography. And I do handle those, interestingly, more recently than I had in the past. I'm finding a home for work. And how lovely when an author's passion is presented well on the page and I can relate to it and we can make a match. That's why we're here.
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much. And such a pleasure speaking with you.
Same here, Estelle. Lovely working with you. Thank you.
Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.